Hey everybody, welcome to the video. Let's go over the 9-game MLB DFS slate for today on Draftkings. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. I'm going to be all season long trying to help you guys become better MLB DFS players that cover other sports as well. So if you're going to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day or each and every single week, you might as well hit that subscribe button and turn the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new videos. And if you don't follow me over on Twitter, I'm at ChrisPennell16, CPen16 over on IG. And if you want some more content over on Patreon, always much appreciated. You can get access to all the extra content that I put out each and every single day, including the cheat sheet, top stacks, the data sheets for pitchers and hitters, the projections, all of that fun stuff. It is there in the link in the description below, as well as my Discord chat. And we got around 300 people, so if you want to hop in, feel free to do so. Like I said, link is down below. But if not, hey, that's fine. Let's just dive into today's slate. So my first thoughts on pitching are that I'm kind of liking the Stars Scrubs approach. I'm not going to be paying up for Darvish and Carrasco. I don't think that's just something you want to do on this slate. But I think pairing one of these high-end pitchers with one of the low-end pitchers, and not to say they're not good, they're just price low. So guys like Dane Dunning and Yusei Kikuchi, I think they are certainly viable to be paired with an ace on this slate. And it's going to allow your lineups to be pretty flexible because we're only going to be spending around $15,000-$17,000 on pitching, which really doesn't break the bank too much and allows us to do pretty much what we want with our bats today. So I'm thinking right now that is the way to go. But we'll start up top with Yu Darvish. He comes in at a massive price tag of $11,000, but he's been one of the best pitchers in baseball. He's making his case for the NL Cy Young Award, and I don't see why that trend can't continue here. Now, the only concern with using Yu Darvish today is that the wind is supposed to be blowing out in Wrigley, and if you don't know how the wind works in Wrigley, when it's blowing out, it will carry the baseball, and some routine flyouts to center can certainly turn into home runs. So that's the only concern, but I mean, you have to be able to hit the ball for that to happen, and Yu Darvish really isn't allowing guys to pair him up in the slightest. If we're looking at his numbers this season, he has been absolutely fantastic. 1.47 ERA, but he's got a 2.83 xFIP, but still both elite numbers. 31% K rate, only a 5% walk rate, and only allowing 0.42 home runs per 9 innings. I'm really not worried about the wind here in the slightest. Could he potentially give up a solo shot or two? Sure, but I think that can come with at least 8 strikeouts, 8 to 10 strikeouts today. And if you're looking at these splits for the Cardinals, it's not like a cakewalk matchup by any means. A 21% K rate, double-digit walk rate, 133 ISO, and just overall okay numbers. But again, it's Yu Darvish. He's been one of the best pitchers in the league. I don't see why that can't continue. Now, if we're looking at his game log this season, he has just been so good. Now, his first start of the year, he had scored 8 points. Pretty mediocre, pretty bad. But after that, he's been amazing. 29, 22, 37, 24, 33, and 28. And actually, he did face this Cardinals team earlier in the year, and he scored 24 points, striking out 7 over 6 innings. So I think Yu Darvish is an excellent play here, and he's certainly my favorite pitching option, despite the wind blowing out in Wrigley today. And then dropping down to, I would say I'd say Yu Darvish is in his own tier. Then you kind of put Carrasco in the tier 2 here. But he's fine, 10,200. It just feels a bit expensive because I wouldn't say he's been overly dominant this season. I mean, he's had some pretty good starts. He's had a game of 30 points and a game of 29 points, and last start was 23 versus St. Louis, but he's also had games like 2.7 versus Detroit, 9 versus Pittsburgh, 12 versus the Cubs, and 12 versus Minnesota. So he's been a little bit up or down, but we know he's got the upside. He's around a 30% K rate pitcher. The walks have been a little up this season. Last year was only at 5%. Now we're in the double digits at 11%. So it's a little bit concerning. He's also allowing 1.5 home runs per 9 innings and a near 50% hard contact rate, which I never like to see out of my pitchers, but I've been liking using righties versus Milwaukee because they've really struggled versus them. They are striking out a ton. And Vegas likes Carrasco here as well. 6 strikeouts in Vegas, 3.7 runs for the Brewers, which is pretty darn low on this slate. And if you're looking at the splits for the Brewers versus righties, striking out a lot, and they're just overall really struggling. A near 28% K rate, 8% walk rate, 198 batting average, 275 WOBA, and a 68 WRC plus. So I think Carrasco is a fine pivot off of Darvish, but again, I feel a lot more comfortable with Darvish in my lineup. If you need the $800 in savings, I think Carrasco's got similar upside here. It's just he feels a little bit less safe in my opinion. Then dropping down to the SP2 here. Now again, I don't have any mid-range guys listed. You can use them, but just personally, I'm liking this Star Scrubs approach when it comes to our pitching today. But Dane Dunning, 5,800. I don't know why he's not getting priced up. I mean, he's been excellent his first 2 starts. And he actually had a no-hitter in his last start. They pulled him after 5 innings, but he didn't allow one hit. They pulled him early, but still, he was excellent. He had 7 strikeouts. He had 7 strikeouts in his first start as well. We've seen his pitch count at 73 and 79, so I don't think he's going to go too deep into the game here, but he doesn't have to at 5,800. Now, his price, they come up from 4,500, but again, I still think he's a pretty big bargain here, and he just no-hit this Royals team over 5 innings. I don't think that's going to happen again, but the guy's got good stuff. I mean, he's been striking guys out, and he's been having good fantasy days, 14 and 24, and if you're looking at his numbers for the first 2 starts of the year, I mean, it's a very small sample size, but he's got a 40% K rate, 1.83 xFIP, 6% walk rate, high ground ball rate, not giving up a lot of hard contact, and the Royals, just not a very good offense. They don't strike out a ton, but they're a pretty weak squad overall. Only 4 runs in Vegas, 59% chance for the win. And I like Dane Dunning here. I mean, if you're looking at the Royals splits versus righties, they're just pretty weak overall. 24% K rate, 174 ISO, 235 batting average, straightaway WOBA, which is a little up there, but 90 WRC plus. It's just not a matchup that scares me, and the price tag is drawing me in, so I think he's a fine SP2 option. Don't really think he's going to get blown up, and he's looked very good in his first 2 starts. I think there's definitely a lot of potential with Dane Dunning. And then Kikuchi here at 5,700. I don't know. I don't really love playing Kikuchi, but I mean, the numbers have been okay this year. I mean, he's actually striking guys out as well. If you're looking at his overall stats, he's got a 6.12 ERA, which is very, very ugly, but his xFIP's all the way down to 3.43, so he's been getting pretty unlucky. He's got a 26% K rate, which is pretty darn good. The walk rate's at double digits, but overall, he's been good. He's getting a lot of ground balls. He's only allowing 0.36 home runs per 9 innings, a 38% hard contact rate, which is the lowest of all these 4 pitchers so far. Now, he can give up some power the past 2 seasons he has, but this year he hasn't really done that, so we'll see if that regresses to the mean there, but I like him here. Texas has been a pitiful offense this season. If you're looking at their splits versus lefties, only a 71 WRC plus, a 290 WOBA, a 5% walk rate, and a 25% K rate. So I like the spot here for Kikuchi. He's only 5,700. It's going to be tough picking between Dunning and Kikuchi, but I mean, I think you can't go really wrong with either. If you're going to split your exposure between the guys, I don't mind that, but I think both are really solid options. And again, I kind of like how pitching goes today because I think you spend up for Darvish or Carrasco, and then you can take an SP2 in the dumpster diving price category of the 5K range, but they're really not that bad at pitchers. They should be a little bit more expensive, so I think we're getting nice bargains on those guys. But I think we can move on to the bats now at this point, and see if it loads. Okay, so we'll start with catcher with JT Realmuto. And as I usually say, I don't love spending up for a catcher, but if you are stacking the Phillies today, I think you want Realmuto in your lineup, and you're also spending down for pitcher at SP2 most likely today, so it shouldn't be that hard to fit in some expensive bats if you want. And definitely like JT, one of the best hitting catchers in the league. He's great versus lefties, great versus righties, over a 300 ISO to right-handed pitching this season. And Rick Porcello, just not a pitcher that really scares you these days. If you're looking at his splits versus lefties and versus righties, he's been pretty bad versus both, over a 200 ISO to lefties and versus righties, and over a 400 WOBA to righties, and only a 15% K rate. So I think you can just load up the entire Phillies offense here. And I will say, I'm surprised their team total is not higher right now. It's at 4.55. I thought it was going to be above 5 when I woke up today. Not the case. So it's a little bit lower than I was expecting, but I definitely think the Phillies can do damage here, and that might just lower their ownership. So all about the Phillies today. Will Smith, 3,900. I pretty much prefer lefties here versus Sensatella because he's got a really high ground ball rate to righties, but he's just not a very good pitcher, and I'll prefer all the Dodgers here for the most part. And Will Smith has crushed right-handed pitching the past 2 seasons. This year he's got a near 400 ISO versus them, 611 slugging, very low batting average, but again, he's just part of the Dodgers stack, which I think is pretty interesting today versus Antonio Sensatella. He's not really good versus either side of the plate, but the ground ball rate versus righties always just gives me a little bit of hesitance because it's 60%. I hate that, and only 11% fly ball rate, and only a 3% walk rate. But he's not a big strikeout guy, and he will give up power to both sides of the plate. But overall, preferred lefties, but don't hate Will Smith in a full Dodger stack. Or if you just have 3,900 left for your catcher position, throw him on and call it a day. Then Victor Caratini at 2,300. So usually I'm all about the Cubs when they have the wind blowing out in Wrigley. But the problem is we have 2 very, very good pitchers on the mound in Jack Flaherty and Yu Darvish. So I'm not really looking to use bats much in this game despite the wind blowing out, which it's always a tricky situation because if they can barrel up Flaherty, yeah, we might get a couple of home runs here. But again, I just can't really trust an offense to go off versus Jack Flaherty, so I'm very hesitant here and mainly just using some of the cheaper options on the Cubs. But if you're going to use anyone on the Cubs, I'd prefer using the lefties. If you're looking at Jack Flaherty splits, he's great versus either side of the plate, But so far this season, he's got a 33% K rate to righties and only a 17% to lefties, and giving up a little bit more to the lefties in every single category. So use lefties versus him very sparsely, very minimally. I don't know, whatever word I'm trying to say. But Caratini is fine. He's got some very okay splits versus righties, and he's dirt cheap at 2,300. Plus the one's blowing out, so I think he's a fine punt catcher. But again, don't really love using guys against Jack Flaherty. Dropping down to first base, we have Cody Bellinger, 5,500, massive price tag, but I said I prefer the lefties here versus Sensatella, and Bellinger certainly checks that category, and he crushes right-handed pitching, over a 400 on base percentage, over a 300 ISO. The batting average has been very low this season, but he's not striking out, and I think he's a fine option if you have the money for him. If you're stacking the Dodgers, you can't leave off a guy like Cody Bellinger. Rhys Hoskins here at 4,600. I think you can use either side of the plate here, lefties and righties versus Rick Porcello. Really struggled with righties this season, but overall, either side of the plate is in play. Now, I prefer Hoskins versus lefties. He absolutely crushes them and has elite numbers all around. Versus the righties, those numbers do kind of drop off a cliff a little bit. Strikeout rate, the ISO goes down. I mean, everything goes down for the most part. But again, Porcello's not a guy that scares me. He doesn't strike out a lot of guys, and I like all the Phillies bats. So Hoskins is certainly in play. Then Pete Alonso, 4,300, continues to be pretty cheap. Now, last night he was 3,000, which was insanely too low. The New York Mets were so cheap yesterday, which made absolutely no sense. It was like they were priced against Shane Bieber, Garrett Cole, and Jacob deGrom. If they all combined into one pitcher, they were just priced so low. 4,300. I guess it's not that cheap, but it's still 4,300 for Pete Alonso, a guy that packs a ton of power versus either side of the plate. And Jake Arrieta, he's a guy I prefer lefties against, but you can use either side of the plate here. He's just not that good of a pitcher these days. Doesn't have a lot of swing and miss stuff. Only has around a 15% key rate overall, and he struggles versus really both sides of the plate, but definitely like the lefties here more because he does get more power versus them. And I still think each side of the plate here is in play, but a high ground ball rate to righties does kind of scare me off them a little bit. But if you're stacking the Mets, I don't mind throwing Pete Alonso on as a last piece, but definitely not a must on this slate. I do prefer him versus lefties. Then dropping down to second base, we have Robinson Cano at 4,600. Like I said, love the lefties here versus Jake Arrieta. And I'm surprised the Mets don't have a higher team total, to be honest. It's a 4.95. I think that might end up getting above 5 as the day goes on, but there's a lot of guys here that crush right-handed pitching, and I don't think this matchup profiles very well for Jake Arrieta in the slightest, so I think the Mets are going to have a pretty good day, and definitely one of my favorite stacks on the slate. But Robinson Cano is crushing right-handed pitching this season. He has a 421 batting average versus them, over a 200 WRC+, a 667 slugging, and a 246 ISO with a near 500 WOBA. So yes, love Robinson Cano. I think he's an excellent addition to a Mets stack today. And like I said, did I say Mets stack? I'm thinking of the Mets pitcher of the Mets stack today, but love the lefties here versus Arrieta. Typically gets crushed versus them. And then Jeff McNeil, he's kind of a cheaper version of Robinson Cano, but he's got some fine splits versus righties, just not nearly as good as Cano, but he's fine. Going to be hitting near the bottom of the order, but at 3,500, he's just a decent lefty here versus Jake Arrieta. The Nick Salak, 2,900. So I actually like Kikuchi today, but Salak's just so cheap. He was popping up well, and it's a value play in my projections, so I threw him on here. He's also eligible in the outfield as well. And his numbers versus lefties this season have actually been pretty bad, but he's just a cheap righty here versus Kikuchi. He's not invincible. He can't give up power, and I'm not expecting him to throw a complete game shutout, so I definitely think he'll probably give up a run or two. But Salak, 2,900, he's okay. Then dropping down to third base, we have Max Muncy at 5,100. This is just another power lefty here versus Sensatella, a guy that really will struggle with left-handed bats. And as of right now, the Dodgers do have the highest team total in the slate at 5.52, so definitely like a Dodger stack today. And since we're probably going cheap at pitcher at SP2 today, you should be able to fit in quite a few expensive bats, but you can't go crazy, but you have to throw in a value bat. But I certainly think I think you're certainly going to be able to fit in a guy like Max Muncy and Cody Bellinger on this slate, but he's good versus lefties and versus righties. Actually been a little bit better versus the lefties this season, but I like all the lefties here versus Sensatella. Manny Machado, 5,500. I just realized I put this out of order. He should have been the first guy, but he crushes left-handed pitching. Now, Luzardo's a pretty good pitcher, and I actually really don't like stacking the Padres today. And Vegas is giving them giving Luzardo a lot of respect here. Only 3.9 runs for the Padres, who have one of the best offenses in baseball. Personally, I feel like that's a bit low. I still think the Padres are going to be fine, but they're just giving heavy respect to Luzardo here in the Oakland Athletics. But Don't mind a couple of these righties here in the Padres because they crush left-handed pitching. Definitely give the advantage to Machado and Tatis over a guy like Luzardo, even though he's a pretty solid pitcher and has been fine this season. But Machado crushes lefties, one of the best lefty mashers in the league. A 330 batting average versus them this season, a 12% K rate, near 300 ISO, over a 400 WOBA. So definitely think he's a fine option. Then JD Davis, just another part of the Mets stack today that I like versus Arrieta. Prefer the lefties, but I still think you can use righties against him in full stacks. Then dropping down to shortstop, we have Fernando Tatis Jr. at 5,600. Pretty much the same exact reasons that I said about Manny Machado. He crushes left-handed pitching. And I don't love the full stack here because, look, they have a very low team total of 3.9, which is pretty surprising. It's actually one of the lowest on the slate, which, I don't know. I feel like it should not be that low, but I still don't mind a couple of these righties here, like Tatis and Machado, two of the best hitters in baseball, versus a lefty. Then Corey Seager, 5,000, probably one of my favorite plays in the entire slate. I've been loving playing Corey Seager so far this season. He's been so good, over a 300 batting average, and he's just absolutely murdering baseballs right now. And he crushes right-handed pitching, and I like the lefties here versus Senzatella, so this grades out as an excellent play here. He's got a 730 slugging versus righties so far this season, a 359 batting average, a 460 WOBA, and a 372 ISO. So Corey Seager, like him a lot on this slate. Didi Gregorius at 4,400. This is just part of the Philly stack versus Rick Porcello. Prefer the lefties versus him, and Didi's been very good versus righties this year. Has had more power versus lefties, but if you're looking at splits versus righties, they have been pretty good. A 313 batting average and only a 6% strikeout rate. So Didi, he's a fine option on Philly stacks. Then Elvis Andrus, pretty much the same exact reasons that I mentioned with Nick Salak. I don't love using the Rangers here, but these guys are dirt cheap for the most part, and Andrus isn't the worst pitcher versus lefties. Now, if you're looking at his numbers this season, they haven't been great, but only an 8% strikeout rate and a 273 batting average. So at 2,300, if you need value, I don't mind Andrus. Then dropping down to the outfield, we have Bryce Harper at 6,100. Power lefty here versus Rick Porcello, and you can't leave off Bryce Harper if you're stacking the Phillies for the most part. So like him in all formats. He's actually been better versus lefties than he was last year versus lefties as well, but still very good numbers versus righties. So don't mind Bryce Harper if you got the money or if you're stacking the Phillies. Then Mookie Betts. Prefer the lefties here versus Antonio Senzatella, but Mookie Betts has been super good versus righties. He has kind of sucked versus lefties this season. Like, just look at the numbers. He's been very bad versus lefties. 0.029 ISO, 246 WOBA. It's just been very rough for Mookie versus lefties, but versus righties, whole different story with over a 750 slugging, 412 ISO, and just elite numbers all around. So Mookie Betts, obviously a fine addition to Dodger stacks. Then we're going to get to a run here of three Mets outfielders, but I think they're all elite plays today. Michael Conforto at 4,800. I think he's an elite option today, probably one of the better plays on the entire slate. Wish he was just a little bit cheaper, but he's definitely very good versus right-handed pitching. 145 ISO is kind of low so far this season, but we know just over his career he's been very good versus righties, over a 400 WOBA, 161 WRC plus, a 342 batting average. Conforto is an elite play on this slate. Dominic Smith, he's also been very good versus right-handed pitching, also been very good versus left-handed pitching so far this season, but over a 400 ISO versus righties, a 746 slugging, a 343 batting average. So Dominic Smith, a fine play in Met stacks. Or just in general, he's also eligible at first base as well. Then Brandon Nimmo going to be leading off here. Doesn't have the same kind of power that Dominic Smith and Michael Conforto have, but he's a fine batter, and he's actually been pretty good versus righties so far this year with a 300 batting average, a 21% walk rate, 187 WRC plus, and over a 440 WOBA. So definitely don't mind Nimmo, and I think all these Mets outfielders are pretty good plays on this slate. Then Kyle Schwarber, 4,100. So the only issue here is that Jack Flaherty is a very good pitcher, but I do prefer lefties versus him. And the wind's kind of blowing out to center to right, which is going to be a big advantage for left-handed bats. So Kyle Schwarber, I think he could be like the one guy that does give Flaherty troubles, and I wouldn't be surprised if he could get a solo shot versus him. But overall, not loving the Cubs because Jack Flaherty's pretty good. But I do think some of these lefties are in decent spots versus Jack Flaherty. And Schwarber, he crushes right-handed pitching, doing very well versus them so far this season. Strikes out a ton, but the power upside is there with over a 300 ISO. So Schwarber's fine. Andrew McCutchen just leading off versus Porcello. Kind of prefer the lefties here, but he's going to be leading off for one of the better stacks on the slate, in my opinion, even though their team total is at only 4.55. Jay Bruce, 2,700, cheap lefty here versus Porcello. He's crushed right-handed pitching so far this year. He's got a 487 ISO, 443 WOBA, 769 slugging, and a 181 WRC plus. So I think he is totally a fine option. Then Jason Hayward, not sure why he's the minimum price, but he is. I know Jack Flaherty is a good pitcher, but he's free. Like, he is absolutely free at 2,000. Flaherty is a good pitcher, but he will struggle a little bit with the lefties. And Hayward's been very good versus righties this season. Like 328 batting average, 361 ISO, 468 WOBA, and a 198 WRC plus. Not sure why he's free, but he is. So he can really open up your lineups if you throw him and at your outfield position. So that's pretty much going to be it for the video, guys. If it was helpful, make sure you guys leave a like. And I also want to mention that I didn't mention any White Sox here, but they're fine as a stack. They're just kind of expensive for the most part, so I didn't really list them, but they're a fine stack as well. But again, that's going to be it for the video, guys. If it was helpful, make sure you leave a like. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate it. And I hope you guys enjoy your Friday and get into the weekend. And if you want some NASCAR content, I did have my NASCAR video posted this morning. That'll be going live on Sunday afternoon as well. So that's going to be it. I'll see you guys in the next video and enjoy your weekend.